You look like you took off a couple lbs.
Yeah, a couple.
What was the process behind that? Just something you want to do for yourself?
I don't eat every 5 minutes.
Well,
That seems to help.
For almost 40 years, John Goodman has been one of the most familiar faces on American television and in American movie theaters. He made his name playing Dan Connor, the lovable, big-bellied husband on Roseanne, and he's carried that same warmth into roles like Eli Gemstone on HBO's The Righteous Gemstones. But this year, the conversation around John Goodman hasn't been about a script or a scene. It's been about the way he looks, and just how different that look has become. A few weeks ago, a completely unplanned photo taken in the middle of a grocery store sent his name shooting back into headlines. Fans who grew up watching him fill a room with his size and his booming laugh are now doing a double take, because a man in that photo barely resembles the actor they remember. And once you understand how long this change has actually been in the making, the surprise starts to make a lot more sense. For most of his career, John Goodman's size was treated almost like a piece of his identity. Directors and writers built characters around it. Audiences adored him for it. He was the big guy who made everything funnier just by walking into frame, and for decades nobody questioned that image, because it was simply who John Goodman was on screen and, in many ways, off-screen too. What most fans didn't fully grasp at the time was what was happening underneath that image. Goodman has spoken candidly in interview after interview about the role alcohol played in his life for years. It was an occasional overindulgence. By his own account, drinking became part of his daily routine. On set, before appearances, woven into the rhythm of his life in a way that eventually became impossible to ignore. He's told the story publicly of showing up to accept an Emmy while hungover, shaking his way through the ceremony. It's a startling admission from someone so widely respected, and it says a lot that he's chosen to talk about it as openly as he has. The breaking point came in 2007 when Goodman made a decision to stop drinking for good. It wasn't a single made-for-TV moment of resolve. By his own description, sobriety became real for him only once he stopped fighting the process and let himself surrender to it, a shift that took hold gradually, built on the accumulation of small choices rather than one dramatic turning point. What came next surprised even him. Quitting alcohol didn't just change his health metrics. It rearranged his entire relationship with food. He said that for years he approached eating the same way he approached drinking, compulsively, chasing comfort rather than nourishment. Once alcohol was out of the picture, that same restless energy needed somewhere to go, and for a while, food quietly absorbed it. It took him years to recognize that lasting change meant addressing both habits together, not simply trading one for another and calling a fix. His struggle played out largely in public, across interviews and late-night appearances, long before anyone was calling it a transformation. That context matters, because it's easy to look at recent photos and assume this happened quickly. It didn't. It was a long, uneven process, a tug-of-war between old patterns and the version of himself he was slowly trying to build. Goodman has also been open about the fact that his sobriety isn't something he considers finished. He's spoken about still attending recovery meetings on a near-daily basis, nearly 2 decades after he first got sober, treating it less like a solved problem and more like ongoing maintenance. That day-by-day mindset appears to be a big part of what's kept both his sobriety and his physical health intact for so long. So, how did a man once known for his size become someone longtime fans now struggle to recognize at a distance? There wasn't a single trick behind it, and there wasn't a fad diet he abandoned after a few weeks. It was a gradual, sustained overhaul of daily habits that unfolded across more than a decade. By his own account, Goodman has lost close to 200 pounds since he first committed to getting healthy, a number that's genuinely hard to picture until you sit with it. That's not a couple clothing sizes. That's an entirely different body carrying him through his 70s. He's spoken about shifting toward a Mediterranean-style way of eating. More olive oil, more fish and vegetables, and portions built for an actual human appetite instead of the all-you-can-eat mentality he once lived by. Diet was only one piece of it, and arguably not even the hardest piece. Goodman has also leaned on low-impact exercise, things like elliptical training and boxing work, that let him build strength and burn energy, without further damaging joints that had already taken a beating from decades of extra weight. That detail matters more than it might seem, because Goodman has undergone 2 knee replacements. Years of carrying additional weight wore his joints down to the point where surgery wasn't a choice anymore. It was simply necessary. Every workout since has had to be deliberate rather than punishing. There's also a mental side to all of this that never makes it into a photo. Goodman has talked about journaling what he eats and staying conscious of the emotional triggers that used to send him into a spiral. Unglamorous, repetitive work that's ultimately what makes weight loss last instead of reversing itself within a year. It's easy to fixate on the number on a scale or the slimmer frame in a recent photo. The real work happened in thousands of small, boring, repeated decisions made over more than 10 years, none of which anyone was filming. What sets his story apart from a lot of celebrity transformation headlines is what's absent from it. There's no mention in his own accounts of weight loss surgery or medication driving the change. It's diet, movement, sobriety, and plain stubborn consistency, stacked on top of each other year after year. Slow and unglamorous, but apparently effective given enough time. He's also credited stage work with keeping him physically engaged in a way that film and television don't always demand. Theater, he suggested, requires a different level of physicality, and staying involved in live performance gave him another reason to keep his body capable, separate from any specific goal tied to a number on a scale. Over time, it became less about hitting a target weight and more about simply being able to keep doing work he loves without his body getting in the way. It would be reasonable to assume that a health journey stretched out over more than a decade might have pulled Goodman out of the spotlight for stretches at a time. That's not what happened. If anything, he kept working at a pace that rivals actors half his age, layering project after project on top of an already enormous body of work. His path to Hollywood wasn't exactly a straight line. Goodman was born in Afton, Missouri in 1952, and originally went to college on a football scholarship before an injury redirected him toward acting instead. It's worth pausing on that for a second. An injury on a football field is arguably the reason we know his name at all. He broke through nationally as Dan Connor on Roseanne, a role he played from 1988 to 1997 that earned him 7 Emmy nominations and a Golden Globe for Best Actor in 1993. Decades later, he returned to that same character, first for Roseanne's 2018 revival, and then in the Connors after Roseanne Barr's departure from the franchise. Somehow, he made an aging blue-collar father feel just as relevant in 2018 as he had in the late 1980s. Not an easy trick to pull off across 3 separate decades of television. He was also a familiar face on Saturday Night Live, hosting the show more than a dozen times, placing him among the most frequent hosts in the program's history. That kind of recurring trust from a show that burns through hosts quickly says something about how reliable Goodman has always been, both in front of the camera and behind it. His film resume is arguably even more impressive once you line it all up. He became one of the Coen brothers' most dependable collaborators, appearing in Raising Arizona, Barton Fink, The Big Lebowski, and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Across more than a decade of work together. He voiced Sully in Monsters Incorporated, one of the most beloved animated characters of the last quarter century, introducing him to a generation of fans who had never seen a single episode of Roseanne. He turned up in Argo, 10, Cloverfield Lane, Kong, Skull Island, and dozens of other films spanning genres most actors never attempt across an entire career. More recently, he spent close to a decade playing Eli Gemstone, the patriarch of a chaotic televangelist family, on HBO's The Righteous Gemstones, which wrapped its 4th and final season in 2025. He also lent his voice to Papa Smurf in 2025's animated Smurfs film, walking the Los Angeles premiere red carpet visibly slimmer than fans remembered. And even that appearance wasn't without its own complications. Reports at the time noted he'd sustained a hip injury months earlier while filming in the United Kingdom, part of an upcoming project from Oscar-winning director Alejandro G. Inarritu. That project, titled Digger, will reportedly put Goodman on screen opposite Tom Cruise later this year, notably his first film role since 2019, following a stretch where he stayed active mainly in voice work and television. What makes the timeline remarkable is that none of this happened during some extended break from the spotlight. Goodman wasn't disappearing from view for months to focus purely on his health, the way some celebrities do. He was managing his transformation while still showing up on set, still memorizing dialogue, still hitting his marks, all while quietly reshaping his body in the background. That kind of dual commitment, staying professionally active while overhauling decades of habits at the same time, says something about the discipline running underneath the whole story. It also explains why so many casual viewers took this long to notice. When someone is on screen every week for years, gradual changes in their appearance tend to blend into the background, especially in roles that don't call attention to physical fitness one way or the other. It took an unplanned off-duty photo to make the scale of the change impossible to miss. That photo arrived in early August 2026. Actor David Delucy, best known for playing Jerry Russo on Wizards of Waverly Place, ran into Goodman by pure chance while grocery shopping. Clearly starstruck, Delucy snapped a quick selfie in one of the store's aisles and posted it to Instagram, calling Goodman his childhood and a legend. The photo spread fast. Within hours, it had made its way across multiple platforms, and the comments filled up with fans genuinely stunned by how different Goodman looked next to the version of him they remembered from decades of television and film. Some people admitted they scrolled right past the photo the first time, not immediately recognizing him. Others jumped in to clarify that he wasn't unwell, just leaner and healthier than he's been in years, the visible result of a transformation that had been quietly building for well over a decade before this single candid shot forced casual fans to pay attention. What's notable is that this wasn't even his first appearance-related headline of the year. Coverage of him at South by Southwest back in March had already generated some buzz about his changed look, tied to conversations about his shift toward that Mediterranean-style eating approach. But there was something about the informality of the grocery store photo that hit differently than a red carpet shot ever could. No styling, no lighting setup, just a 74-year-old man buying groceries on an ordinary afternoon. That kind of unplanned authenticity tends to make a transformation feel earned rather than staged. Through all the renewed attention, Goodman's personal life has remained steady. He's been married to his wife, Anna Beth, since 1989, and the two have weathered plenty together across more than 3 decades, including his years-long struggle with alcohol and the health issues that followed. She's been described in past profiles as a steady presence through his hardest years, playing a significant role in his eventual recovery. Together, they raise their daughter, Molly, who has gone on to build her own career working behind the scenes in entertainment. He's continued attending recovery meetings on a near-daily basis, treating sobriety as something that requires ongoing attention rather than a milestone that was checked off once and left behind. That same steady, unglamorous consistency runs through both halves of the story, the sobriety and the physical transformation, and it's likely a big part why both have held up for nearly 20 years. Financially, decades of steady, varied work have paid off. Goodman's net worth has been estimated at around $35 million, built through television salaries, film residuals, voice acting royalties, and other ventures, a reflection of just how consistently he's worked across nearly every corner of the entertainment industry for more than 4 decades. Part of what makes Goodman's transformation land so differently than the average celebrity weight loss headline is the total absence of a shortcut narrative. In an era where a huge share of public figures openly credit prescription medications or surgical procedures for rapid changes in their appearance, Goodman's story reads almost like a throwback. There's no dramatic before and after tied to a single medical intervention, no 6-month countdown, no marketing tie-in. It's a man in his 70s who spent close to 2 decades making the same handful of decisions over and over, long after the initial motivation had worn off and long after most people would have quietly given up. That's also probably why it took so long for the public to catch up to what was actually happening. Celebrity transformations tend to get packaged into tidy timelines, a diagnosis, a diet, a dramatic reveal. Goodman's doesn't fit that mold because it never had a single reveal moment. It had years of red carpet appearances where he looked a little different than the year before, interviews where he mentioned falling off track and getting back on it, and press tours where his weight was rarely the headline because it was always a project to talk about instead. The grocery store photo simply became the moment where enough incremental change had accumulated that casual observers finally noticed all at once. There's also something worth sitting with in how Goodman himself has framed the entire process. He hasn't described it as a war he won and then walked away from. He's described it as maintenance, something closer to physical therapy than a finish line. That framing matters, because it's a far more honest description of how sustainable change actually tends to work for most people, celebrity or not. The version of this story that gets the most attention is always the dramatic transformation photo. The version that actually explains how it happened is the boring one. The daily meeting, the tracked meals, the workout scheduled around 2 replaced knees, repeated for years without an audience. It's also worth remembering that Goodman never asked for any of this to become a headline. He didn't announce a health initiative, launch a product line, or sit down for a tell-all interview timed to a magazine cover. The renewed attention arrived because a fellow actor happened to run into him buying groceries and thought the moment was worth sharing. In some ways, that's the most fitting way for this particular chapter of his story to reach people. Not staged, not promoted. Just an ordinary afternoon that happened to capture an extraordinary amount of quiet, sustained effort. So, where does John Goodman go from here? With the righteous gemstones wrapped, his voice work on Smurfs behind him, and Digger set to bring him back to the big screen alongside Tom Cruise, it's clear he has no plans to slow down. Whether it's another film role, another voice performance, or simply another candid photo that goes viral overnight, people are paying closer attention to John Goodman right now than they have in years. Maybe that's the real story hiding underneath all the headlines and the viral grocery store selfie. This isn't a man chasing a trend or reinventing his image for the cameras. It's someone who quietly decided, back in 2007,